Just make sure that we are recording this section. Okay. There we go. Excellent. All right, so I have two questions that have just come through. Yes, if you're using Google Colab, you are set to go for the rest of Unit 1. I will actually go over how to install and how to use Jupyter Notebook if you would like to essentially switch gears. The biggest difference between Google Colab and Jupyter Notebook, they're both essentially the same thing, except that Google Colab is essentially hosted on Google's cloud environment. So you can essentially just work off of the processing power of Google's cloud. And then Jupyter Notebook works off of your local computer. So it's the processing power that your local computer is able to work with. Later on this week, we'll have a session in office hours where we'll talk about how to install the Anaconda distribution, like how to install Jupyter Notebook through the Anaconda distribution. Kind of a simple, easy way to have Anaconda and Jupyter Notebook installed on your local computer. So not something you need to worry about right now. We're like in class, we're going to be working with Google Colab, and your assignments can be done in Google Colab. R seems to have not been used by a lot of people yet. It's the main focus in most of the boot camps I've seen. Is there a reason for that? R is very statistics driven. So for some boot camp programs that just want to be focused on only the general statistics, you tend to see the R language, the R language programming language. The thing about the advantage of Python is that Python doesn't just have everything that R is able to do statistically speaking, but it's also able to implement this in into a performance or into a deliverable product. So Python is flexible enough to not just use for statistics driven efforts. It can also be used towards building any project that you've built up to now into a deliverable that you can actually implement. It just interfaces with any software development project you may be interested in. Python is one of those languages that you can also create like computer games if you were so interested in. I'll share some examples of that down the road, but it's just a much more formidable, straightforward and interpretable language. Some of the questions I'm seeing come up. You'll be using GitHub, but it seems complicated. Yes. I'm going to show you how to access and how to get some of the notebooks that we have currently hosted on GitHub as of today. The part of cloning, submitting, and making making changes to GitHub, I'm going to cover that later next week. So yes, you'll have some work with GitHub. How imperative is it that you use Chrome? Is Edge that incompatible with the course? So Chrome is really useful for this next step that I'm going to show you. So I highly recommend that you use Chrome, that you have Chrome downloaded from the get-go. I'll share the PowerPoint that I just shared. I'll make sure that that is added to you at the end of the class as well. So before we go on to the next step, yes, you should have Chrome installed for this next process, simply because it'll allow you to access the notebooks that we have stored on GitHub a lot easier. There is a way that I'm going to show you how to do it without using Chrome. So, if you don't have Chrome immediately installed, don't fret. But with that, let's go ahead and get started with our first tool that we want to dive into for this class. I want us to focus on Canvas. So at this point, you should have already had a chance to see your, where did you all go? You should have had a chance to already have access to your Canvas dashboard. So I like to keep it bookmarked on my Chrome notebook. This is going to look a little bit different for you as for me, because of course I have far more classes that I've taught previously. But I'm going to go ahead and take you to what should be your first session. So DS36 1.1, data wrangling and storytelling. I'm going to make sure that it looks very similar to your notebook. So your student view should look a little bit like this. Now, all of our individual content, including your syllabus, is included as part of DS36. This includes all 4 modules that we'll be covering throughout the week. Each day, we'll be covering an individual module. Module 1 is what we're going through today, this morning. As you can see, we're going to go in just a moment how to submit assignments and how to save work. I'm going to recommend that you install the Google Chrome Colab extension if you haven't done so far, and then we're going to do a brief review of how to use Python data types. So this first section here is your warm-up. I'm going to expect that for the beginning of every module project, every guided lecture, you'll have already read through these materials. And if there's any additional material, you'll be able to find that on your GitHub link, which you'll also be able to find inside your Engage section. So let me start this front. Let me say this again. Every day, you'll have access, and you should have access to 3 different sections in every module: the warm-up, the Engage, and if need be, the review. The warm-up is the material I expect you to have read in time for our class. And then the Engage is the parts that you have to submit. As you can see, each one of these modules will have 4 separate parts. One is the module project, which I'll explain to you in just a moment. The second is your attendance. This is an attendance code that I will be giving at the beginning of every day at the guided lecture. It'll be a randomized numerical code that you'll be able to click as far as take the quiz and insert as part of an answer to the quiz. So today's answer to your guided lecture is, looking it up, 3217. So what I'm going to ask you to do next is go to your Canvas, go to DS 1.136, go to your Module 1 project, and click on your attendance, and then include the number 3217, and just submit that. What does this do? Well, this tells me that you were in attendance during the guided lecture, at very least during the time that I essentially shared the attendance code. Now, the attendance code is for us to keep track of whether you were in attendance for the guided lecture. If you are, for whatever reason, not able to attend a specific lecture and you weren't able to attend the attendance code, that's fine. You're still going to be expected to turn in the module project and the next sections of the material. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and go over to Slack, and I'm going to ask you to give me a thumbs up when your attendance code has been submitted. Nice, Nathan, that's a good tip. I appreciate that. So give me a thumbs up in the message I'm about to share, Felipe. You know what, just go ahead and actually give it on Felipe. Yeah, that works. That's fine. Too late. I was too slow on this. Cool. So you get the gist. There you go. All right. So you understand how to submit the attendance. If you didn't get an error, that means you are set and good to go for your attendance. The next section is a multiple choice section called Check for Understanding. This is essentially a multiple choice quiz that you're going to need to turn in and submit. As you can see, the deadline is towards the end of our unit. So again, if you haven't turned it in yet, if you don't turn it in today, that's not a problem, but just make sure that you fill this in throughout the day. And finally, there's a pulse check. This tells me how you're feeling about the material you've used so far. It has a few questions on kind of how you felt the instructor was able to deliver the material, how you feel as far as embracing the concepts that you were working with. Additionally, in your module projects, you have as part of your weekly modules, you have all of the material that allows you to review the class policies, including deadlines, the instructions that I shared earlier during our PowerPoint presentation on how to pass the specific unit, and how to share and how to go over any material that we might be going over. So this is essentially your one-stop shop for all of the resources that we're going to be going over. Now, the last section that I want to address is the Module 1 project. And the code is, let me share that again on the Slack channel, the Zoom chat, in case you missed it. Thank you to everyone who shared it, 3217. All right. So now, let's talk about probably the more robust section of this Canvas, because this is the one that gets a little bit tricky. For Module 1 project, every day, I'm going to expect you to have access to not just GitHub, but the link to GitHub. You'll see a couple of things happening here once you click on Module 1 project. One is a link to GitHub. Here on GitHub, you'll see two specific articles being shared. One is the DS111 Intro to Python notebook. This is the notebook that we're going to be using together in just a moment. And following is the DS111 Intro to Python assignment notebook. So this assignment is going to be the notebook that you're going to be submitting to CodeGrade. Now, as you can see, this is a series of tasks that are requiring you to remove the raised not implemented error code, fill in your code, and follow up with a series of assert statements. Those of you who've completed the pre-course work might find this to be a little bit familiar. With me so far? Great. The other notebook that you're going to be seeing is the notebook that we're going to be using every day as part of the guided lecture. Now, as you can see, the guided lecture is a little bit more of a longer notebook. We're going to be going over this together in just a few moments. But the question I get a lot is, how do I open this in Google Colab? Well, there's a couple of different ways. The first method is, of course, to take the entire repository as it's shared inside DS11, DS Unit 1, Sprint 1, and download this material. And you can go do this by, I'll take this all the way back. You click on the Python Fundamentals notebook, you click on DS11 Sprint 1, and I'm going to show you an easier way. If you don't want to do it this way, don't worry about it quite yet. You can click on code, and you can essentially just download the zip file. This is a little bit of a trickier way to go about doing it. You'll see that it downloads a zip file to your local computer that you can then open as far as the Finder file. I'm going to give that a second to actually open up. And you'll see that this opens the file as a zip file. Once it's a zip file, of course, you need to decompress the file. This is going to be different for Windows users, where you need to right-click, and you should have an option for uncompress or decompress the file. Mac users can generally just double-click, but it should just open it up. All of your notebooks are then going to exist on your local computer. So this is a tricky way to go about doing it, because once you've done this, and you have your files on your local computer, you then have to go to Google Colab. And you can access Google Colab by clicking on Colab, research.google. I'm going to go ahead and share the source for Google Colab if you haven't used it before. And that will take you to Google Chrome. Once you're in Google Chrome, you can then upload the notebook that we've used in class. I think that was under my downloads. Over here. Long process to just upload the notebook. That was a lot. So I'm going to give you an easier step-by-step process. Easiest step-by-step process is to go to your browser, whether it's preferably Google Chrome, and unfortunately it does have to be Google Chrome for this process to exist. It's called Open in Chrome. You just want to do a Google search. This will open the Open Notebook in Chrome. Sorry, I gave you the wrong search engine. Open Notebook in Chrome. Okay.
I think it might be called Open in Colab.
Open in Colab. Thank you. Okay. There's a brain fart there. Open in Colab. Thank you. So Open in Colab, and I'm going to share the extension for you on Slack. Thank you. Whew. All right. So there's the link to Open in Colab. I've shared that on Slack. And it's just add this as an extension on Chrome. This will open up a orange looking thing on the top right of your extension. If you don't see it, there should be a little paintbrush looking thing on the top right next to your username in your username value, and you should see all of the extensions that I have. They should be a little bit different for you specifically. And as you can see, this extension will allow you to essentially open a notebook from GitHub directly to Google Chrome. So what does that mean? If I go to the Python assignment and I'm just on the page itself, all I have to do is click on the Open in Chrome extension, click on that, and you'll see that it opens up a notebook in Google Colab. Gonna pause there. All right, Anonymous asks if you need to have a fundamental Python understanding of Python already. No, that's what today is dedicated for. So today we're essentially spending some time working in base Python code. So if you weren't able to complete your pre-coursework, this is the class for you to catch up. Imperative is to use Chrome. Highly recommend it. It just makes your day-by-day a lot easier. Do we need to save a copy of the notebooks you get like GitHub, like we did? Yes, indeed. So if you're already familiar with saving a copy of the notebook, go right ahead. I have a lot of people who speak very highly of the GitHub desktop app. If you feel comfortable navigating with the desktop app, feel more than welcome to. I'm not going to be using it simply because I'll be teaching how to connect using the terminal, how to essentially communicate from your local computer to GitHub using the terminal, simply because that is still very much the common practice in most any job that requires you to have an ongoing connection with GitHub still uses a lot of the terminal application. However, people who use the GitHub desktop just report very highly, very positive experiences with it. Great questions. All right, so easy way to do this. Just going to review very quickly. Open and download the Open in Colab extension in Google Chrome. Make sure you have Google Chrome installed. Get that Chrome extension ready to go. Make sure to save a copy of the notebook. Now, a big component of how we do classes in these sessions is I am going to go through a notebook. I am going to show you some code. We're going to run the code, and presumably you've been typing along with me. That's what code along refers to. Now, especially in these live lectures, this happens very quickly, and sometimes I type a little bit faster than some of you would like. For that, we're going to have this strategy in place. As part of every notebook, as part of every introduction, I am going to share. Where did we go? Where am I? Here we are. I am going to share my notebook. This is the notebook that I am going to be completing as part of the lecture. Now, my recommendation is that you make a copy of your own notebook and you code along with me. But in any situation where you feel like, oh, I've fallen behind, oh, I'm getting an error I don't understand, oh, I don't I seem to have missed a cell or two, you are always welcome to go back to just click on that notebook. You'll see that it's actually named as DS36. This is the notebook that you'll get at the very end of class. And it should, most of the time, based on internet connections, update you to where I am at any given point in the code. So if I'm halfway through the notebook, it should very much fill up along with you. It should essentially put you on par with where I am in the notebook. The only condition is that you need to click on the runtime and click run all to make sure that all of the code that has previously been run is up to speed. Any questions about this so far? Okay. Excellent. Finally, here is the next and somewhat of a crucial step. How do I turn in my homework on Canvas? So I've got a good question as if two people are accessing the same notebook in Colab, will they be? No. So if you access this notebook or the notebook that's referred to the Colab notebook, this will put you on the same pace. You're still going to need to make a copy of the notebook. You won't be able to make any changes to this notebook that I've created so far. So you're going to need to make your own copy and then run the cells. So I missed a step there. So you're going to save your own copy. It'll open up a copy itself, and you're going to need to run all the cells to get back to where I was in the code. For the most part, just try typing along with me. Gonna leave that for now. Great question. You are able to set it up so that you can essentially create code simultaneously with someone else if you so choose. But I don't have, like, my share restrictions are set so that you can only see the code, not actually make changes. Okay. So next and final administrative note here. Let's go back to, if you go back to your module 1 project, you can click on the link. It's going to take you back to our assignment. You're going to need to turn in assignments for your module projects on a daily basis. The way I can recommend you do that is practice the same thing we've just done so far. Click on the notebook link to open up the link to the notebook on GitHub. Open the notebook in Colab the same way you've done for your pre-work. Make a copy of the notebook and save a copy in Drive. In order to turn in assignments, let's go ahead and take a look at this first task of your assignment. This task is a very simple task. I'm going to go ahead and give you that first answer for you. If you're following along, I'm giving you the answer to this first assignment. You're going to go through the entire notebook. You're going to have a number of tasks to complete. This task asks you to write your name as a variable called your name. So what that means is that I'm going to create a variable called your name, and I'm going to assign this to a string called Julian. I'm going to run this cell, and I'm going to simply check to make sure that these cells run with the first assert statement. That's it. Let's presume you've gone ahead and completed the assignments for the other 8 tasks in this notebook. I'm done with my homework. I feel very good about my homework. The next step is you're going to need to download your notebook as an IPYNB file. When you download this notebook, typically, it's going to be saved to your downloads folder, but where you choose to save it is up to you. It doesn't really matter. You just need to remember where it's downloaded to, because this is the notebook you're going to need to turn in. How do you turn in notebook? How do you turn in your assignments? This is where code grade comes into play. Over by module 1 project, you'll have access to the module project, unit 1. Again, this is the link to our class today. And if it's not popping up for you, that's fine. You can refresh the page and see that it's going to ask you to load module 1 project in a new window. When you click on this, it'll open up a file where you need to upload the files. Very straightforward. You just need to click upload files. It'll open up a gray area for you to click and upload files. And I'm going to go ahead and share a specific notebook that I've already worked on previously that has most of the answers already completed. Source. This file. Okay. You see that this opens up a file. It really doesn't matter what you name it. We've got a program, so whatever file you name it, it's still going to be attached to you as a student. But as you can see, it's going to link, it's going to pop up the file that you've chosen to submit, and then you're going to submit. So what's happening next? This is where I essentially save myself the trouble of having to grade 36 different assignments. Because here's what's great about code grade. This will automatically grade your assignments essentially for me. As you can see here on the top right, there's a process happening. It's setting up a virtual machine. It's setting up the virtual computer. As you can see down here below, you'll see that there's an 8-point rubric being set up on the left and on the right. That means that of this task, there are 8 tasks that needed to be completed. You can see a timer running because what this is doing is that it's going across your notebook and filling up all and looking at all of the answers that you've provided. This is crucial that you know how it works because this is going to be how your assignments are going to be auto-graded. Yes, we're going to go through this. I'm going to actually share a Loom video so that you have access to how to do this over and over again. But you can get to it. I'm going to go ahead. This is actually going to run for a few seconds for a minute or so. You can get back to code grade. From your module project, go to module 1 project. So from Canvas, module 1 project, click on module 1 project. At the very bottom, it'll say there'll be a gray button that says load module 1 project in a new window, and that'll take you to your submission folder. You got to go ahead and click out of that and take us back. Uh-oh, I got a 94 out of 1 score right up here. You can see your score. You can see down here that I scored 7.5 out of an 8-point category. This is the part that gets tricky for a lot of folks. Don't worry, there will be a recording of this that you can get back to. I'll make sure that there's a shorter recording so you don't have to go through the entire lecture. But I want to highlight a couple of things here. What this is showing is how well you did in class. How do you know what things you got wrong? Well, this is where you can access the code button on the left side. Note there are 3 tabs here at the very top. This is the one it defaults to, your auto test. And at the very left, you can go to code. The screen that you see here is the notebook that you've just submitted. As you can see, here are all of the answers that I've turned in with my assignment. How do I know what I got right or wrong? Well, you can access the auto test output. And what I'm going to tell you to do is you'll see that there are 2 notebooks that have been generated. The notebook that is going to be of interest to you is this second notebook, the one down here below. And what this does is that it runs the tests with a series of hidden assert statements, as well as a series of error codes. And we're going to go through these error codes together in just a moment. But what I want you to be attentive to with this auto test output is any assertion error or any error code that pops up from this second notebook. as you can see, as part of these assert hidden tests, they are essentially giving you the answers. The answers are provided as part of the code grade. And you can see that this operates like any part of a Python code notebook, where it says, oh, asserting is error in poke values. Did I include all of the key value pairs? And if I look at my code, it appears I did not include error in poke values. Now we'll talk a little bit about error codes in today's lecture throughout the day. But what I want you to be aware of, how do you get or how do you aim to get a perfect grade? Well, this is how you do it. You navigate through the auto test output for any errors you may have had, and you evaluate based off of the assignment itself. What does this mean? Well, the good news is that 100% score in the sprint challenge with unlimited submission attempts is very attainable when you have the answers being given to you as part of code grade. So this is why I said at the very beginning that 100% score with your sprint challenges is absolutely attainable. Let's go over this one more time because it's important. You click on Load Module 1 Project. Let's say I've gone back and corrected my assignment. You'll see that you have your latest submission shared. I'm going to go ahead and upload a submission that is fully completed and fully correct. I submit that. It's going to go through the virtual machine process of running the setup. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to set up depending on how many people have actually turned in the material. Go through that process. I'm going to give it a second. While it goes through that, wait for you to actually bring up any other questions you may have. And there's my perfect score. If I want to navigate and look at any output, you'll see that you created an auto test output and 2 assignments being created with a perfect assessment. Yes. So I've got a question as students, can you utilize auto test and code grade on all of your assignments? Absolutely. Remember though, the process that you're going through is actually trying to learn the content on your own. I do recommend that you don't just lean on the answers as present on the code grade. Make sure to give it a fair attempt. Make sure to learn this material for yourself, but be aware that you have access to the resources and the material in code grade in order to attain that perfect score. Again, the perfect score matters less to me. It matters enough for me to make sure that you are doing well in class. And if you are, in order to make sure that you are on the right track to completing the course, I want to also ensure that you are learning the material and understanding what it is you're submitting. Can you resubmit a notebook once you've corrected any errors? Absolutely. You'll have unlimited attempts to go back to the notebook in either Colab or Jupyter Notebook, make the changes that you want to make and resubmit again. And for both your sprint challenges and your module projects, you have an unlimited number of attempts. Give you a moment for a few questions. I'm going to go ahead and close these assignment notebooks for right now. And while you're bringing up questions, please let's go ahead and keep asking all the questions you want. But in the meantime, I'd like to make sure that you have access to the notebook that we're going to be working with together today. And for the next 15 minutes, we'll actually go over the intro to Python. We may go a little bit over our scheduled time. I'm okay to do that, to keep going throughout scheduled time. If you need to drop off, please note that you are more than welcome to drop off and just access the recording. With the assignment, with the knowing how to turn in your assignments with code grade, you are prepared to actually complete the rest of the module, today's module, going forth. We have a couple of questions on Slido. I love that you're using Slido this much. What should we do if we think that one of the assertion errors is inaccurate? Send me a message. Happy to take a look at it together with you. that might happen. This is why I kind of ask for patience sometimes. A lot of these are built. Sometimes I'll make changes to these last minute. I will have a typo or two at times. I apologize on those behalf. So yeah, if you see that something seems to be inaccurate, send me a message. Pre-course has a specifically named. Nope, you don't have to worry about naming conventions. So you don't have to do that here. That is correct. What time do modules need to be done by? By February 6th. You have a little bit less than a month to complete as many of these modules to be done. However, if you let some of these modules are harder than the others. I have made it so that we are working, yes, so that you are submitting them on a daily basis. Again, if you are, in order to show that you have been engaged with the process throughout, we recommend that you submit one module per day by the end of the day. If it's not done by the end of the day, you can submit it tomorrow morning. The timelines, the deadlines on this are very flexible. Yes, we are going to be going over a guided lecture, covers a couple of different other material. You do not have to submit the instructor notebook. This is between us going over a guided lecture. What is the assignment that we are given access to on Thursday evening due? The sprint assessment, in other words, the multiple choice questions, will be due by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Friday. The sprint challenge or the module notebook will be also due. You'll need to have submitted an assignment by the end of that Friday, but having to get that perfect score needs to be done by the end of the unit. The idea behind making sure that we have your sprint, I know it's a little bit complicated to kind of frame it this way, but the reason is that we want to make sure that you are engaged with the class before the end of the period of time that you are required to do a financial investment in BloomTech. You should, Felipe, you should have access to all 3 modules by this point. If you do not, let me know. You should have access to DS module 1, 2, and 3. Stop sharing for a moment. Just want to make sure I see all of you so far. You all look great. Oh, yeah. So there are a total for unit 1, there are going to be a total of 12 modules. Share the screen again. So if you're here on DS 1.1, your dashboard should include 3 separate modules. Obviously, I have a bajillion because all of the classes I've taught, but you should have at least 3 modules. Can I get a? I can't see you. Yeah, okay, so you see it. Perfect. Excellent. All right. So on Slack, I've shared the most recent notebook. And let's go ahead and get started. All right. Here we go. Just closing tabs because I have a lot of these open. Again, I recommend if you want to follow along, make sure to follow along with me. These first 3 items are everything we've talked about up until this point. So if you just want to scroll down to the Python and Notebooks, Colab Jupyter, we're going to talk a little bit about how to navigate and how to use the notebooks with how to use this notebook in this environment for Python. Now, here's the thing about notebooks. Notebooks work as a way to separate code from a type of written language called Markdown. Markdown is this type of cell that you can see where we include our text. So the way this works is that notebooks allow you to both create language that allows you to type and explain your code as you type your code along. But then you can also have cells that are code-based cells. When you work in Jupyter Notebook, you have the two options, either to create markdown cells or to create regular code cells. As you can see up here on the top left, you'll see the option to create either a code cell or a text cell. And you can see the difference between both types of cell. One kind of looks like your general Google Docs type language, where you can essentially create any type of cell and just, write a story if you'd like, whatever you choose to code. And it'll give you a nice little display as you're typing out the code. You can also use on the top right the option to delete a cell. You can also run your cell by clicking the play button for a code cell on the left side of an individual cell. You should be fairly familiar from your pre-course work. One shortcut that I want to encourage you using is on your keyboard, hold down Shift and Enter. What that does is that it will automatically run a cell and move you on to the next cell. I recommend, as you get stronger with working with code in notebooks, that you start to embrace the keyboard shortcuts, simply because navigating using the arrow keys on your keyboard allows for a little bit more flexibility with the code itself. Now, when you click on a cell itself, you can edit the information in either a code or a markdown cell. But one shortcut that I want to make sure that you're comfortable using is the escape key. The escape key will allow you to exit the navigation mode from a specific cell. And once you're in that navigation mode, you can click up and down, and you can also use certain keys to create code cells above or below the current cell. Now, as you can see, if I click A, it'll put me inside the code cell above my current level. I'm going to click Escape and click B and create another cell below. If you want to see additional shortcuts, you can see the command palette and the keyboard shortcuts that are available for Google Chrome. These shortcuts are a little bit different from Jupyter Notebook, but you're also welcome to kind of create and set all of your shortcuts however you prefer in your own environment. So with that being said, let's start off by talking a little bit about Python. So why Python? As I said earlier, Python is what's referred to as an object-oriented language. What that means is that every object you create or every line of code that you create eventually becomes an object. And those objects can then be assigned to a specific variable. So what do I mean by that? Much like those early days from your algebra, you can assign the value of an object, for example, the number 2, to a different object. In other words, X, after I've run this cell, is now saved to my computer's memory to being the value for X. Why didn't it display in this case? Well, that's simply because this object hasn't been assigned or called yet. So if I call X as the last line of code in my cell, I will output the value itself. Now, this is one of those specific items of working with Python that in a notebook itself, only the last line of code in a notebook cell will actually return or output information from the cell itself. With me so far, hopefully this part makes sense. Just because you've assigned one value, you can assign other values to other objects. In this case, I have a variable called X and a variable called Y, which means that if I sum up those two variables, X plus Y, I will get the output of these two numerical values. 2 plus 7 is, of course, 9. see if there are any questions so far. Excuse me, folks. So I'm already going a little bit above time. So let's take this a moment just to give me a little bit of a break. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back at 01 after the hour. And we'll go through the rest of the notebook in this section. So let's go ahead and schedule this for come back at 06 after the hour. That in Python and in any type of built-in in any type of Python environment, you're going to have a number of built-in functions. Built-in functions are generally defined as functions that are already pre-created by Python's general environment, by Python's built-in code. In other words, if you type something out and you see that it changes color on you in a notebook environment, that is going to be a built-in function. So if statements have a different colors, because these are like we'll refer to this in just a moment, but built-in functions have a number of built-in rules already ready to go. So for example, if I type in the type function, you'll see that it immediately changes color. And when I include the round parentheses values in Jupyter Notebook, a pop-up value essentially pops up. And what this is telling us is that it needs some value to be included as part of the function for it to work. So as you can see, it requires a specific argument, and we won't worry too much about kwargs quite yet. But if I run this without actually explaining what I need to do within the function, it'll throw an error. And it says, oh, it requires this type error, requires some value to be included as part of the function in order to work. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to include the variable x that we created above. And as you can see, what it displays without error is an integer value, which means that this x value, which refers to the number 2 that we created above, is actually just an integer. Now, this goes back to the question that was just put up on the Slido channel, the print built-in function. The print built-in function will output or display any information that you include as part of the print parameter. In other words, if we include x as the value here, and I run this cell, it'll print out the number 2. But then if I include a y statement, it will also output information because it's the last value that I've included as as part of my line of code. So go ahead and you could just just put up a couple of fingers up on the camera. Thank you, Felipe. Thank you for covering for Nick there. What do you think is going to be the next value that pops up when I run this x? 2. Yeah. And that's simply because the y isn't the last line of code in this code cell. So it's important to keep track of these values together. And print can be whatever you want it to be. So for example, it doesn't have to, you can include a string from the very beginning as part of the print statement and you'll see that this just outputs values. A thing about Python. Python can serve not just as an object-oriented language, it's also a very fancy calculator. So the plus sign will work with any value that we create. So x plus y will calculate 9. X minus y will return a negative value because 2 minus 7 is going to be negative 5. For multiplication, x times y is going to return the number 14. Note, this is all information being output or returned, not printed. If I wanted to divide my values, I can do x divided by y, and we see we get an interesting value here. This is a fraction of a value because, of course, 2 divided by 7 is going to have some remainders, and when it's taken to a decimal value, it's going to return the value altogether. Now, here's something interesting that happens when you use the type function on x divided by y. It will return a float, or the word float. What this is defining is that it's the output of x divided by y is not necessarily just the number 0.2857. What it is that this value exists as a float value. A float value is essentially referred to as a floating point value, which essentially stands for that a decimal point is going to be floating as part of the numerical value itself. There's a question as to difference when using or. We'll get to that tomorrow. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about those conditional values in just a moment, actually in just a moment. So if you wanted to calculate exponential values, say I wanted to do x, you would use a double asterisk sign. So in this case, I'm using 2 to the power of 4. That will return, 2 to the power of 2 will return 4. If I change this to a y to the power of 2, in other words, 7 times 7 is going to be 49. Then there's the value of floor division. Floor division essentially divides your value by the value that you're calculating it by, but it will return the float value. So for example, y, in other words, 7 divided by 3 will return 2.3333. However, if you return the division or the value as a floor division, the value will return 2. In other words, it will round down to the next whole number. So Stephen, not quite remainders. For remainders, you're going to use this, the percentage sign. Because for the percentage sign, for example, y percentage sign 2 will return 1, because 7 divided by 2 is normally 2.333333, remainder 1. This remainder value is actually really, it's one of those tricky values that you see being used a lot in interview questions and logic-based codes. So this is one of those things that you want to kind of remember and use from the very beginning. Next, Python is a language that is built very much on top of Boolean operators. A Boolean operator refers to any type of value or code that works as a true or a false value. What does that mean? This shirt that I'm currently wearing is blue. That is a true statement. If I were to say this shirt that I'm wearing is red, that is a false statement. Python interprets values as true or false values as a way of calculating whether a value essentially is marked as a real value within the code itself. So I'm going to show you one more operator that we're going to be using fairly frequently. If we remember, y, if you run it on its own, it's the value for 7. There is an operator called double equal sign. The double equal sign doesn't necessarily reassign the value itself. The double equal sign is just, is this value what you're about to identify it as? So, is y actually the number 7? Let's find out. Shift enter to run the code. Yes, it is. Is y the number 2? False. So if I were to create this as a, I'm going to go ahead and run these as all print statements. Here's a shortcut you're going to want to use. If you highlight any portion of code in the line of code and type the first section of any type of your hyphen values, for example, your round parentheses, you can actually complete and compress all of the expression that you were including to share, you were intending to share. So that's my first false statement. And if I wanted to print a true statement, x being equal to the value for 2 will also print out. All right, to the question as or statements. So yes, seeing a couple of questions. This notebook is, yes, we answered that one. We're going to go into the or in just a moment. Is there a hotkey to view function parameters default value? Yes, I will show you how to access those. Yeah, that one's that. Okay, Felipe, I'm going to answer both of those questions in the next function. Felipe, the double division sign, the double backslash will always round down. And it will omit the value after the, well, yes. So what it does is it essentially rounds down. So it's not that it omits the value, is that it actually returns the value. It just rounds down. So the double backslash just rounds to the lowest floor value. All right. Let me answer the question as to how to get outputs, output values printing out. With Google Colab, there isn't really a trick. You just have to type out the function or the value and take your hands off the keyboard. That will point out the drop down option values. So for example, the print statement will only appear, or the information for the parameters will only appear when you've begun, like once you've typed out the parentheses as the value itself. And as you can see, the print statement itself includes all of the parameters or arguments that you might want to use as a part of the function itself. We'll be talking a lot more about this once we go into Python tomorrow. Let's talk a little bit more about true and false values for just a few moments. So one of the operators that you're going to need to be familiar with is the greater than or less than. The greater than is y is greater than 6 is of course a true value. Is the y greater than or equal to 6 is also a true value. There are operators that you can use to apply more than one conditional value. For example, as to the question we had earlier on the Slido, we can use the AND statement to specify that there's going to be more than one operator at a given time. So in this case, is y greater than and equal to 6 and y is less than 8? Remember, y is 7. Is this going to be a true or false value? It's going to be true. Because in this case, both conditions are being met by this y operator. Let's talk a little bit about the other operator. Is y greater than 6 or is y greater than 8? One of these statements is true. Y is indeed greater than 6. And one of these statements is false. Y is not greater than 8. Y is still 7. Because there is one of these statements that is false, both conditions are not met. So in this case, this Boolean operator will still return a true statement because this or specifies it's either one or the other. If I were to change this value, just going to go ahead and copy paste the whole thing and change this to and, this will return a false statement. Pretty straightforward stuff. This is somewhat on the basics on the basic side of things. We'll get a little bit trickier in just a moment. Here's one of the things that I want you to be very comfortable with from the get-go. As a new coder, it's going to be really helpful for you to navigate Python by understanding what the mistakes mean when you run a mistake. Most of the errors you're going to be getting in Python are going to be one of these types of errors. So for example, here I have an object called the number 3. It is a string. You identify strings by using the quotations. You can use either singular or double quotation marks. I'm going to go ahead and connect this to a single quotation mark. And both of these objects will create a string value. However, because this is a text object or a value with text, it's not actually going to run anything if I try to add this to the number 2. So in this case, 2 plus the words the number 3 are going to throw an error. This is what's referred to a type error. In this case, it refers to there are 2 non-compatible data types, a string and an integer, being asked to calculate values with each other. So if you ever see a type error, it typically means that you've tried to use a type of error that doesn't work with your given code. By the way, another trick you're going to want to know from this point forward. If you need your code in your notebook to run, even though there's an error, you can always type out the word pass. Let me put a pin in that because that's not going to work in this scenario because I need that for a for statement. In this case, this error is just not going to work properly in this case. Another type of error you can expect to see very often, a syntax error. A syntax error essentially refers to a grammatical mistake that you might have faced in your code itself. In this case, here's one thing I want you to note about the error code as it's being read. For the most part, Python in a notebook itself is going to try to tell you or give you an approximation of where it threw the error it was facing. In this case, the syntax error happened x plus y. Hey, you opened one parenthesis, but you never actually closed it. So your error happened somewhere around here. And in this case, this syntax error is actually giving you the definition of what the error is. Unexpected end of f while parsing just essentially stands for essentially an end of line error. So somewhere at the end of the line, the error code wasn't able to parse through. And finally, a name error. A name error refers to a value where you've created an object that was never defined. In this case, this is a variable that you've never applied any value to. It's not 2, it's not 7, it's not anything at all. It's just an object that hasn't been named at all. One quick thing is this is a very common error you may find if you've opened a notebook and tried running the code in the middle of the notebook without having run the previous cells. So if you're ever seeing this situation and you're not quite sure why this is happening, one thing you can do is go up to runtime and go to run all or run before, because this will run all of the cells in the notebook beforehand. And with that said, we've had a chance to look at all of the different types of data types that we've worked, that you're going to have a chance to see throughout. Data types essentially refer to types of integers, objects, or values as they are required to be recognized by Python. There are a lot of different data types that we'll be working with, not just integers, floats, or strings. We're going to be working with date time data types, or for example, some pandas series objects starting tomorrow. But other types of data types that I want you to be very familiar before we get into the pandas library tomorrow are list objects. List objects are any type of arrays. An array is essentially a one-dimensional either string of values. It could be strings, it could be numerical values, it could be whatever you want them to be. However, they are used to store multiple types in one single variable. So for example, if I were to try to run this season list of these 4 objects, it will automatically, based off of the Python version that you're working with, create a specific object. This object is not quite a list. If you look up at the type of object, you'll see that it's essentially creating a tuple. We'll go into that in just a moment. If you want to specify that you're trying to create a list object, I can recommend that you select all the values and use the square brackets. The square brackets creates what's referred to a list object. And a list object has a series of properties that are slightly different from a set value. You can make changes to list, and you can essentially create duplicate values. What do I mean by duplicate values? Is that if I try to reassign the object called season list to spring, it will still display spring both times. I'll pause for questions. No questions I'm seeing the Slack so far. Pretty good to keep going. Another object is called a set. These are unordered values that do not change, and they remain unindexed. I'll talk a little bit in just a moment of what indexing means. But a set is defined as an unordered, unchangeable object that you can create using the squiggly brackets right above the square brackets. Now, the tricky thing about a set is that if you were to try to reassign it, it would essentially remove the spring value. Because the value itself is unindexed, because there's no essential place for the value to be created, you can't have duplicated objects. Another object that sets are one of those values we're not going to be using fairly frequently, but I just want you to be familiar with what they look like. A tuple object is an object that by nature gets created with those round parentheses values. And those round parentheses values, same as a set, will also allow for duplicated values. Now, the thing about these different types of objects is that they all have different properties that you may be able to use. So for example, here's my season tuple. If I press the period button right next to my season tuple value that I've just created, you'll see a drop-down value pop up. And it says there's only a function for count and a function for index. However, my list object, so my season list, here's another trick for you to use, is that as I begin typing in Google Colab, it will present a dropdown of all of the objects I've created so far. And rather than just typing it all out step by step, I can just click enter. When I hit period next to my list object, I see a number of different methods and functions pop up. So this object allows me to make a series of changes to the value itself. And we'll go into that in just a moment. Finally, as part of objects, working with objects themselves, we have a value that I'm going to refer to now, and it's going to come back later on. Tuple unpacking refers to if I need to assign the objects from a specific number of values to different individual variables. So if we remember our season tuple, this is an object that has 5 different values. How do I know? I can use the count object, and it requires me to count how many objects pop in here. So if I say spring, the word spring pops up twice. That's the function that is specific to a tuple value. But there are 5 values here. So if I wanted to assign all of these values from season tuple to these different objects, I can list all 5 variables, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to season tuple. And then season 1 becomes the first object from that tuple. If I change this to season 3, you'll see that it returns the summer value. Dictionaries. This one is somewhat important for you to know, because a number of the libraries that we'll be using in Python generally operate as a key value pair or a type of dictionary or list. Note, most of the objects we're going to be working with when it comes to the pandas library is focusing on both dictionaries and libraries as a combined value. A dictionary is identified by the use of colons to identify the keys and the values. If I have a different comma, I will share the split between the value of winter is a value that's identified for cold, summer is a value that would be identified for hot, and so on and so forth. You can create a dictionary using the squiggly bracket. So these pairs will create a dictionary that identifies the falls to be colorful, the summer to be hot, and the winter to be cold. Note one very interesting thing about this dictionary is that it actually orders my value in alphabetical order. A quick caveat. This is going to be different depending on which version of Python you may be using. Python 3.6 may operate a little bit differently from Python 3.8. You may see some differences in use between Jupyter Notebook and Google Colab. For the most part, they will still operate uniformly when identifying dictionaries. So one thing you can do with dictionaries is, say you want to add another value to your dictionary. So I've got winter, summer, and fall. Say I wanted to add summer again, or if I wanted to redefine the value. Let's create this as a dictionary and let's see what happens. Summer, because it's the initial key present here and here, will only return the most recent value that you've identified as part of your key for your dictionary. We'll pause there for a moment. We're doing okay so far. Any questions? Okay. If I want to add a value to a dictionary, this is where things get interesting. Winter, summer, fall, spring. If I want to add a new value to my dictionary, one of the things I can do is create the value. So for example, if I wanted to add spring, all I need to do is define and with square brackets, the key that I want to include as part of my dictionary. And include that with an equal signs that my spring will be flowery. And what happens when you run that season dictionary on its own? You'll see that spring gets added as one of your key value pairs. So the thing about key value pairs is that I'm actually going to go ahead and show this off for the dictionary first, is that the season dictionary has a number of different built-in functions and methods that you can use. For example, one is the keys. And the keys is a function that returns just the keys that are pertinent to the dictionary itself. I can also return the values, and this will return the values from the dictionary itself. There are a bunch of other methods you can use and functions that you can include. And some of these are going to be relevant to you down the road. So for example, if I wanted to update's an interesting one because what update does is that it requires a new key value pair to be added to your original dictionary. So say I wanted to add, I don't know, another key value of super winter, very cold for all of those in the Northeast. Oh, hang on. What did that not work? That should be a dictionary, one more dictionary pair, right? Oh, I see. Okay. New item for dict. Oh, I see what I did wrong. Got it. Okay. Forgot to include the dictionary value. Nope. Super winter. Super winter. Super cold. Is one more dictionary than I can add to the value. So what does this do? This is one more dictionary value that I've created. With the update value, if I create that super dictionary, I've essentially added another value to my dictionary pair. So understand that update will add other dictionary pairs to your values. These are changes that happen in place. What does that mean? I don't need to reassign my value to season dictionary. Season dictionary, these changes are made permanent as part of the changes to the data frame, to the dictionary itself. So for example, for a list, we have an object called season list. One of those functions, called pop, allows you to pop a value from a specific index. What do I mean by that? Is that I can specifically highlight a value and pop that value out of the list. Let's take a look at the list we created earlier for just a moment. Here's my list up here. And the thing about indexing in lists is that Python works as a zero index language. That means that when you're counting through a series of values, your first value is going to be 0, second value is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we go back to our list value below, where I popped my value out, my second value in that list was summer. If you try to look at your season list from here, you'll see that the pop value, let me go ahead and return the parameters and the language, is that it will remove and return that item from my list completely. What happens if I pop the value again? Say if I wanted to rerun my cell accidentally, well, it's going to pop out a different value. And it will have removed my first of the string values. Uh-oh, wait. What if I keep doing this over and over again? Well, eventually I'm going to hit a point where I've run into an index error, where because in this list, there's only a 0 and a 1 index value in the list, I can't pop anything at position 2. Because in my list, I have 0, 1, and that's it. So this is going to be a key component for indexing through your values. If you're ever in this situation and you want to return your list to its original value, you just need to rerun the values where you created that list earlier. And that is both the pro and con of working in your notebooks. That rather than running your cells from the very beginning towards the end, as you would in a number of different coding environments, notebooks operate on a cell-by-cell basis. So that's your pop value. I'm not going to go highlight, it's the one I just showed, so I'm not going to highlight that again. Let's talk a little bit about the clear value. That one's a pretty straightforward value. If you look at the definition, it just clears all items from the dictionary. And if you look at your season dictionary from here, it is now a blank dictionary. Let's talk about indexing. Now, I recommend that you run your season list and make sure all of your 4 values are present for this if you'd so like. Otherwise, you're welcome to rerun the notebook to get you back to where essentially we're all located together. The thing about indexing is, as we've defined, you're working with values from 0, 1, 2, 3. Another way you can ask and locate values, I'm going to go ahead and get to your questions in just a moment, is that you can also use negative values. A negative value will essentially start your indexing from the right side left. The tricky thing about that is that when you pop a value with a negative value, your indexing value from the right to the left becomes 1. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So in this case, if you pop your -1, you're removing the last value from your string index. So go to your questions before I go to the next thing. So for dictionaries, they always come out in numerical alphabetical order. Depends on the version of Python that you're working. Most of the time, they will come out in numerical or alphabetical order. Can you pop out key value pairs out of dictionaries? You can remove, it's a different value, where you can pop out a value based off of a specific key. So from your dictionary, if you wanted to pop fall, it will return it's because it's updating the value itself. Let's go down there. I'm going to use pop a lot from season dictionary. So let's take a look at season dictionary. Pop, that just requires you to run. Yeah, you need to return both. What did I write instead? What is in this season dictionary? Oh, okay, because that dictionary doesn't have it. Okay, so the dictionary I tried to create didn't include it. So super winter pops out super cold. So yeah, you can still pop out. You just need to identify the key itself. So is there a difference between dictionary update and season dic in terms of how to add? Yes. So see update. So the question is, what's the difference between update and string? So update requires you to include a dictionary value. You need to include a dictionary item. Season dictionary needs to be a dictionary value included. So cold, hot. So you need both the key value pair. That's not going to work because I just removed the dictionary. This is tricky because we're running into a lot of code cells over and over again. If you look at the season dictionary now, in order to do it this method, you're just highlighting that you want to add a new value to the key by specifying the key index. So cold, hot, warm, chilly. They both work to add values to your dictionary, but one requires you to specify the dictionary, whether you're specifying adding an entire key value pair or adding a key first and assigning the value to that key. But they both work exactly the same way. All right. Let's go back to our indexing. Oops. So season list. So we have these three values in our season list. We have 0, 1, and 2. If I wanted to return the value for my season, I can return, if I wanted to return the first value in my season list, I would want to highlight my first value. Let's note something interesting about this. When I print the type of value, this value inside the list is a string value. But there's something interesting that happens with this output from season list 0. This fall is a string value, but it's also a string object, which means that as part of that string object, I can also do what's referred to as string indexing, which is where including my value for, say, for example, 0, I can return the first letter of this string object. So I want to return the second letter, I can do the same thing. And so on and so forth. With indexing, you can essentially index within an object that's already been indexed throughout. So one of the things that you want to know is that this object of season list 0, this object exists as a string, and that object can be added and additional indexing can be done to that object. So as we go one more through our season list, just want to highlight what we're looking at in season list. If I wanted to return the first two objects in this list, so say I want to return both fall and winter, I can specify that I want to highlight using a colon all the values between 0 and 1 index. So in this case, 0 and 1 will return a list object that is not inclusive to that first value. But if I want to specify 0 and 2, I now include the objects at 0 and 1. If I want to include all my objects, that's 0 and 3. And this works the same way as including all objects in the list. This part gets a little bit tricky, so I recommend that you play a little bit around with it. For example, if I wanted to return the second and third object in a list, this is 0, 1, 2, I would want to return 1 to specify that I am including this first object, and all objects throughout. So think of this as colon and everything after that returns winter and spring. There are multiple ways to show how it. So each method kind of like each of the so I've got a question that came up is there a specific way to correctly use pop and update? Both of these methods are used for very specific purposes. So for example, so the season list object that we created with pop is specifically when you want to output the value that you've just knocked out. So this is like removing without replacing a value. And you want to only include the value that you've removed without replaced. So there are different methods to show and use different methods, one way or the other, but like they all just have different parameters and different functions that you might want to use for different purposes. So the answer is, yeah, there are different ways to like get to the same result, but sometimes some methods are for a very specific purpose. The method I'm showing with this method is going to be very specific to the pandas methods that we'll be working with in class. Jolie. All right. Promise I've only got a couple more things to show you before we go on a break. Let's go back to season list. Share how that season list is looking. There are 3 objects. With for loops, there is the one you're going to be using mostly for this class is for loops. You'll be able to use while loops in other capacities, but for most of the purposes in Unit 1, I'm going to want you focusing on the for loops. For loops requires a very specific syntax as part of the class itself. The for loop requires 3 or more different objects to be created as part of the item itself. The for loop requires a syntax of for an item in every item to exist, you're going to navigate through those objects. So for I in season list is an interesting loop to like actually work with. So this list means that for I in every item in this list, in other words, for I in fall, in winter, and in spring, I want you to take a specific option. For example, I want you to print the I option. So this function for I in season list, print I, means that each and every object gets printed independently. And this is the part of Python where things start to get really interesting. Because for I in every value in the list itself, this object starts to get treated like individual strings. And because I is recognized as a string object, you see that it returns all of the string object methods and functions. So for example, you can use capitalize, which will return a capitalized version of the string itself. So when you print that out, you've essentially shared for all of the values in season list gets printed out in capitalize. It doesn't actually change your values in the list, but it still outputs these values as individual capitalized values. I'm going to go ahead and share this code on Slack, just so that you have it as part of the code. I'm going to show this here because this one's going to be fairly useful for you throughout. Check some questions so far. All right. Let's talk a little bit about conditionals here. So we talked a little bit about true and false values. One of the values that you're going to be familiar with is the use of conditionals to actually make certain rules. Conditionals are any situation where you explain, hey, I want to have a certain rule be put in place. So for example, if your value for y is greater than, for example, 7, which we recognize is not in this case, I'm going to want it to actually commit to a specific rule. So in this case, this if statement says if y is greater than 7, colon, that colon's really important, make it do this specific task. For example, print a string value that says y is, if y is greater than 7, y is greater than 7. If I run this on its own, the code will run, but nothing will happen. And the reason for this is that the conditional value that just got presented has no alternative but to either only run if this value works. If I were to specify y is equal than or greater to 7, the statement actually works. However, let's go ahead and use our original example here. If y is greater than 7, print y. However, say I want to actually have there be more conditions. This is where the else statement comes into place. Note that this is an else, parentheses, for any other conditions, y is not greater than 7. As you can see, my y is still 7. Y is indeed greater. If y is greater than 7, it's not greater than, it's actually equal to 7. So this ends up being the true false value that we've created earlier. And in any scenario, any conditional value will be an object that you're needing to create as part of the variable itself. With conditionals, as with for loops, you're going to run into situations where you may need to run into scenarios where you need to create empty lists. I want you to be familiar with this case, as it's going to help you kind of navigate some of the functions that we'll be working with down the road. What do I mean by empty list? If I wanted to create an object called even numbers, I can make it equal to just an empty square bracket. And odd numbers, make those equal to odd numbers. This will create two lists that don't actually have anything in them. And this is going to be helpful because in a scenario, for example, like the next statement, where for I in all the values of 10, this is where the range built-in function comes into play. Let me actually just go on a quick aside and refer what the range function does. Range will print all of the values between 0 and the non-inclusive 10 number that you've included as part of the variable. Whatever variable you create, 5, it'll print all the values up until that point. So you won't be using this a whole lot throughout the class in Unit 1. This will come in handy later on. But range is a value that essentially kind of creates a list object that you can essentially iterate through. But for this range value, print I in range, if a value, and here's where that modulo value, that percentage sign comes into place, is divided by 2, and that division of 2 returns 0. In other words, if 0 divided by 2 returns 0, I want this condition to be met. We all know that if 1 divided by 2 is going to return a remainder, so therefore that's going to be a remainder 1. 2 divided by 2 is going to remain another even value. This will return an even value. So if this condition is met for 0, then I can say that these even numbers, I want these values appended to a specific list. What do I mean by that? If I divisible by 2 is equal to 0, I want this added to my even numbers list. Otherwise, I want my odd numbers appended. And what happens with this case is that now my even numbers have a list created for even numbers. You can argue that 0 is not an even number in this case. Let me quickly check for any questions. So for loops can change the list items. The thing about it is that capitalize in this case isn't a built-in function in this scenario. Because you're working for this individual value, it's just changing the individual values for this for loop. This versus, I haven't actually used versus in a whole lot of scenarios. Generally, it's like and or. So we won't be using versus a lot in this class. Can we clarify the importance of indenting? Indenting is important in Python specifically. So when you get into, thanks for that question. I'm happy to actually address that question. Python is a language that actually identifies a whole lot of its indexing as part of its syntax. If I tried to run this line of code without indents, this code will not work. You can see it'll actually throw an indent error. And that indentation error is specifically based to the Python syntax, because that Python syntax essentially recognizing Python recognizes blank spaces as actual characters. This is not the case for SQL or certain other coding languages, but is generally good practice in other coding languages. In Python, indenting becomes essential. So, am I using the percentage to identify remainders and separate odd and even numbers? That is absolutely correct. So this identifies if I is equal to 2, this will return the value to a specific numerical value. I'm going to grab you a quick range of code here. You're not going to need to know this, but this is just how you can essentially print a statement to highlight what's happening here. So we'll go into this on Thursdays. Yeah, I don't want to introduce list comprehension quite yet. But what this does is a command that prints for every value. This does the same thing as the for loop. For any range value, it'll print out whether a value is even or odd. Last but not least, this will be important tomorrow. Python isn't just code that works on its own. Python has a number of packages and libraries that are installed as part of the Python library itself that you can call into your environment. These environments are not necessarily installed from the get-go for a number of reasons. Specifically, it's because you might be working with an environment where you want to specify what language you want to work with. So this is where import comes into place. Import calls a library that's either saved on the cloud that you can either install externally or that's already part of the Python built-in packages. But in importing it, what you're doing is you're calling this package to navigate and build on top of the library and code that you're working with. So for example, if I wanted to import the pandas library, this is what we're going to be using tomorrow, you can call a library that has a bunch of different functions that we'll be using that we can choose to use. Now, if you don't call this library, it won't actually work. So for example, another library we'll be using is called NumPy, which stands for numerical Python. As you can see, it doesn't work because it hasn't been called. But one of these libraries that you might want to find yourself importing is the pandas library. And the pandas library, by common practice, has an alias that you need to identify. That alias gets identified, essentially you can essentially call it as a specific object called PD. Whenever you import pandas for your records, just call import pandas as PD, because it's customary to shorten the word for pandas into PD, because PD can then essentially work the same way you would your pandas library. Some of the most common libraries that you'll be using are both NumPy, pandas, and matplotlib. And some of these libraries actually have a bunch of cool Easter eggs. So for example, the developer of Python language, Tim Peters, essentially created a little Zen and philosophy behind Python that you can import using the import this method. And another method that you're going to be using fairly frequently is called the Seaborn library. So Seaborn, customarily aliased as SNS, is a visualization library that allows you to call on different visualization skills down the road. One of the objects that you'll need to use for your homework is called the load dataset method, which allows you to, one, specify the type of data set that you might be interested in using. And there's a bunch of different data sets that are included as part of the Seaborn package. So for example, if you wanted to use the diamonds package, you'll see that this outputs your values from Seaborn into a data set object. And this data set object allows you to create a data frame object that we'll be using later on this week. I can then assign this object to something I'm going to call diamonds. And this diamonds object is now a data frame that we'll be essentially spending some time navigating and actually doing some data analytics starting tomorrow. Whew. All right, folks, for those of you who are still here, thank you for sticking around. Those will all be recorded, so if you missed it, no harm. Attendance is very much not something that is mandated. We take attendance code in order to see your engagement, but we also want to make sure that we have these resources available if you're not able to attend the 9 to 11 period of time. With that said, I am going to go ahead and reshare the link to this notebook for you to access. And you now have all of the content you're going to need in order to answer the questions in today's module project. With that said, I'm not going anywhere for a few minutes. If you're still with us, if you're still with me, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have after what essentially was a lot of information that I've just dumped on you. Let me stop sharing so I can actually see all of your faces. All right.
Hey, could I take a look at the notepad in the notebook in your on your screen?
Yeah, of course.
I had my my landlord come in and fix the faucet.
That's fine. Yeah, absolutely. So if you need that notebook, let me actually show you a faster way for you to get it. If you're on Slack and you go to the summary of today's class, you'll have access to my notebook at any point as I'm filling it out. Where did you all go? Where did you all go, Tucky? Something's interesting in the sense that I just, what are exact? Yeah, I'll review that before we go. Okay. So you can access everything I filled up onto this point. If you need to make any changes to that notebook, you just need to click on make a copy of the notebook or save a copy in Drive, and you can edit that notebook from that point forward. All right, let's review what needs to be done today. Tomorrow, for those of you who may have some questions, we are going to be diving into the pandas library. So in Kent, we'll essentially be using some of the pandas methods and functions in order to make certain assessments from the data that we'll be working with. All right, you should be in Canvas in data wrangling and storytelling. Your module 1 will be to go over to the engage section, fill out the attendance code if you haven't so far. Click on the check for understanding. This is the multiple choice question. These are multiple choice questions for you to answer. Fill out your survey of how you feel after the content for today. And finally, in module project, you'll find a link to the GitHub repository where all of our notebooks are being stored. You're going to need to click on the Python assignment AG, the auto-graded assignment. You're going to open this notebook in Google Colab. Make sure once you open it in Google Colab, make a copy in Drive.
Hey, Julian, I don't think you're sharing that part of your screen.
Boo. Sorry.
No problem.
Let's try that again. Desktop 1. I'll take this a couple steps back, move to trash, move to trash. All right. So from module project, you're going to go over to module 1 project. You're going to click on GitHub. You're going to open the AG assignment in Google Colab or download. We'll go over how to work with Jupyter Notebook tomorrow. You open this as a file in Google Colab. You make a copy, save a copy in Drive. It's a lot of different steps. You answer every single one of these tasks. You remove the raised non-implemented error. You write your answers in those not implemented error, very much how you did your code. You save that file. You save it for yourself. You download it. You then take it over to load module 1 project and submit this assignment to your, see, some of you have already done so. Back. Let me make this student view, sorry. This is what it's going to look like for you. So you submit your assignment to your Canvas. You let it get auto-graded. After you see your auto-graded assignments, it's going to look like this. You review your output. If you need to reassign or resubmit, you're more than welcome to do that. And that is all you have to do. That is probably the trickiest part of what you need to do on a daily basis. But it's a matter of answering those 4 sections as part of your module project. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Can we raise instead of removing raise? Yes, you can. Stephen asked if you can just comment it out. You're more than welcome to do that. There we go. Okay. What other questions do you have? How do you resubmit? Is it the same process as submitting the first time, or do we need to remove? You do not need to remove the last one. You'll see an option. It'll just ask you to just click on upload files. And the fun thing is that it won't actually overwrite your last save. You'll see that both of your versions are actually saved as part of that. So you'll actually have all of the versions that you've submitted as part of the auto-grading work. How is it that we access your work? Done on the screen. So if you go back to the channel object that I've created at the very end, I'll actually add this link at the very end along with the recording, so you have both things. But you'll always have my instructor notebook as part of this initial summary of the day under instructor notebook. So just click on that, and it should open to the notebook I've filled out. Yes. Yes, it does. You'll have everything that I've opened. If you're finding that some of the things don't quite display, so for example, in Google Colab, you'll see sometimes it has like a drop-down arrow. You just need to click on the arrow to like display the rest of the code. Okay, tomorrow we're diving into pandas. You'll have another module project due. You'll have more time to like kind of navigate and use this code grade, like figure out and learn how to use code grade. What's happening for the rest of the day? I'm going to need to take a quick breather. Essentially, I need to grab lunch for myself, and I'll be back probably in about 30, 45 minutes, and I'll be available on Slack for any questions you may have. Start working on those module projects. Start trying to navigate. Don't let this kind of take up the rest of your day. If you're feeling comfortable with the material, you feel like you were done very early, feel free to reach out to me. I can come up with some other exercises that we could potentially work through. Otherwise, those are your tasks for the day. Starting at not 5 p.m. What is the time? Starting at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I will be available for office hours. Essentially, we'll be using the same link for office hours. You're welcome to come in and we can review a lot of this content with a little bit of a different, slower pace. So with that said, enjoy your break. When are the projects due today? So February 6th is the short answer. But if you need any question as to when projects are due, let me see. You can actually see in Canvas your due dates for all of your assignments. There's data wrangling 1. So under your modules, you'll see due dates for all of the individual dates. This is like end of the day, like 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So make sure that these values are all submitted by those due dates. The module projects themselves all are due by February 6th. So if you haven't turned it in today, don't worry about it, but do make sure not to let it, don't let yourself fall behind on this. Don't leave it all for the last minute. All right. Folks, thank you for your patience. This was one of the more longer sessions. That's usually the case with this first day. Starting tomorrow, generally going to be a little bit of a shorter session for guided lectures with additional assignments to kind of navigate through. But feel free to send me any questions. Enjoy your break. And I will see you all probably in about 30 to 45 minutes. I will have the recording up. Usually it takes a little bit of a period of time for the recording to pop up. So bear with me while Zoom and YouTube upload these videos. But in the meantime, I will see you all either at office hours or tomorrow morning. Have a great rest of your day.